Story 1. Ghost Hunters and the Viral Video. I was 22 when my friends convinced me to join their ghost hunting group. To be honest, I wasn't really into the supernatural. I joined because I loved the thrill of exploring abandoned places. Back then, I was working part-time at a coffee shop and still living with my parents. Most weekends, I'd be out with the group Brandon, our self-appointed leader, Mia, the tech genius who brought all the recording gear, and Jake, who had a knack for finding these creepy locations online. This time, Brandon found a building that had gone viral years ago. The video was grainy, but it showed a dark hallway, faint whispers, and a door slamming shut on its own. None of us admitted it, but we were hooked. The building was an old hospital, long abandoned, with graffiti-covered walls and broken windows. It sat on the edge of town, shrouded by trees that looked like twisted shadows, even during the day. The air was damp and heavy as we approached, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The place had a reputation not just for the viral video, but for the stories locals told about patients who had died there under strange circumstances. When we stepped inside, the silence felt too complete, like the world outside had just vanished. Every step we took echoed in a way that made the place feel alive, as if it was listening. We started exploring, splitting up into pairs to cover more ground. Mia and I took the west wing, while Brandon and Jake went toward the operating rooms. As we moved, I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were shifting just out of sight, like the building itself was watching us. Then we heard it whispers. They were faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. I froze, gripping Mia's arm. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. She nodded, her face pale in the dim glow of her flashlight. The voices weren't random, they were saying something specific. "Leave now," one whispered, its tone urgent but quiet. The words matched exactly what we'd heard in the viral video. Mia quickly adjusted her recorder, trying to capture the whispers. The static crackled faintly as the device picked up sound, but by the time she hit record, the voices had stopped. "Maybe it's just the wind," she said, though her voice wavered. I wanted to believe her, but the air in that hallway felt too still, too heavy, for anything natural. We pressed on, stepping carefully over broken tiles and shards of glass. Every creak of the floorboards made me flinch. Then, out of nowhere, a loud bang echoed down the hall. It sounded like a door slamming shut hard. We both jumped, spinning toward the noise, but the hallway was empty. I remember Mia whispering under her breath, "This wasn't in the plan." Meanwhile, Brandon and Jake radioed in. Their voices crackled with static, but we could make out Jake saying, "Something's not right." The door to the operating room just slammed behind us. Mia and I exchanged a look. That was on the other side of the building, yet the sound we'd heard felt like it came from right here. "We're coming back to meet you," Mia said into the radio, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. As we turned to head back, her flashlight flickered. It wasn't unusual for batteries to die during our trips, but Mia had just replaced hers before we started. She smacked the flashlight against her palm, and it came back on. But now every step felt like the building was pulling us deeper. As we moved toward the rendezvous point, we heard the whispers again. This time, they were louder, like someone standing just behind us. The words were clearer now, and they weren't just telling us to leave. They were repeating phrases from the viral video. "Help me," one voice pleaded, so close it sent shivers down my spine. I turned around, shining my flashlight, but there was no one there. Just an empty, decayed hallway stretching endlessly into darkness. I didn't say anything to Mia, but I could tell she felt it too. Something was with us. When we finally met up with Brandon and Jake, they looked shaken. "We heard footsteps," Brandon said, his usual bravado gone. Like someone was walking right behind us, but there was no one there. Jake was gripping the camera tightly. "I swear I saw a shadow move in the operating room," he added. "It wasn't us, and it wasn't our lights." Mia suggested we check the footage right there, thinking maybe the cameras had picked up something our eyes couldn't see. She pulled out her laptop and connected Jake's camera. The playback started with the usual stuff: us, walking through hallways, talking. But then, it showed something none of us had experienced. On the footage, The operating room door didn't just slam, it opened slowly first, like someone was stepping through, before slamming shut with force, and in the corner of the frame, there was a shadow, tall, humanoid, but impossible to define. It seemed to glide across the floor and vanish into the darkness. We rewound the video, but it was unmistakable. None of us had seen it when we were there. "This is insane," Brandon muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "We would have seen that." Jake nodded, his face pale as if the realization was hitting him all at once. Just then, the whispers came back, but this time, they weren't distant. They were in the room with us. "Get out," one voice growled, louder than before. The sound reverberated through the air, making my ears ring. Mia dropped the laptop, and the screen cracked on impact. "We're leaving," she said, her voice trembling. Right now, none of us argued. We packed up our gear as fast as we could and headed for the exit. But when we reached the main door, it wouldn't budge. Brandon pushed with all his strength, but it was like the door was welded shut. Panic started setting in. Jake tried the windows, but they wouldn't move either. "This doesn't make sense," Mia said, her breathing quick and shallow. "We just came through here." Brandon suggested we try the side entrance, so we ran down the hallway, our footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. But as we turned the corner, the air grew colder, so cold I could see my breath. And then we saw it. Standing at the end of the hallway was a figure, its body shrouded in shadow. It didn't have a face, just a featureless void where its head should have been. It stood perfectly still, but somehow, I felt like it was staring straight at me. We froze, none of us daring to move. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a chaotic cacophony. The figure took a step forward, its movements unnaturally smooth. That's when Brandon snapped out of it. "Go, run," he shouted, and we bolted in the opposite direction. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. We ran blindly, turning corners, tripping over debris, until we found ourselves back at the main door. The figure was gone, but the whispers remained, as if the walls themselves were alive. Brandon threw his shoulder against the door again, and this time, it gave way with a deafening crack. We stumbled outside, gasping for air like we'd been drowning. We didn't stop running until we were halfway back to the car. The cold night air burned in my lungs, and my legs felt like they would give out at any moment. When we finally reached the car, Brandon fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice before unlocking the doors. None of us said a word as we piled in, slammed the doors shut, and sped off, the abandoned hospital growing smaller in the rearview mirror. It wasn't until we were back on the main road, the streetlights casting their reassuring glow, that we dared to speak. "What the hell was that?" Jake finally asked, his voice cracking. No one had an answer. Back at Mia's house, we sat in her living room, replaying the footage we'd managed to capture. The camera had kept recording, even as we ran. The static grew worse the closer we got to the door, but in the final seconds, something new appeared. As we pushed through the main door, the camera caught a reflection in the glass, a dark figure standing right behind us, its faceless head tilted slightly, as if watching us leave. "No way," Mia whispered, rewinding and playing the clip again. The figure was unmistakable. It hadn't followed us outside, but it had been there, mere inches away. "What do we do with this?" Brandon asked, his hands trembling. He'd always been the fearless one, but tonight had broken something in him. "We can't just keep this to ourselves." Mia shook her head. "We can't show anyone. People will think we faked it." Jake agreed. "No one's going to believe us. And even if they do, what then? Who's going back there to prove it?" The room fell into a heavy silence, each of us grappling with the weight of what we'd seen. I didn't want to admit it, but I was scared that whatever was in that building might not stay there. Over the next few days, things got worse. Mia called me panicking, because she kept hearing whispers in her apartment, faint but unmistakable. Jake stopped answering our group messages altogether, and Brandon refused to talk about what happened. One night while I was trying to sleep, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from an unknown number. The message was simple: "Help me." My blood ran cold. It was the same phrase we'd heard in the building, the same desperate plea from the whispers. I deleted the message immediately, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The breaking point came when I decided to delete the footage from my laptop. I couldn't bear to have it on there anymore, like it was a portal to something I didn't want to understand. As I clicked delete, the screen froze. Then the whispers started through my speakers, this time growing louder and louder, until they were all I could hear. I yanked the power cord out, but the whispers didn't stop. My phone buzzed again, and I didn't even need to look at it to know what it said. I grabbed my car keys and drove to Mia's house, too terrified to be alone. When I got there, Mia was packing her things. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice hollow. "I can't stay here. Something's wrong. It's following us." I didn't try to stop her. Part of me wanted to leave too, but I didn't know where to go. Jake's number was disconnected by then, and Brandon had stopped responding entirely. It felt like whatever we'd awakened in that building wasn't just haunting us. It was unraveling us, pulling us apart from the inside out. The group that had once been inseparable was now scattered, each of us isolated and terrified. It's been 3 years since that night, and I still haven't set foot in another abandoned building. I moved to a new city, far from the hospital, and the memories of what we saw there. But sometimes when I'm alone, I hear it again. The whispers. Just faint enough to doubt, but clear enough to remember. I've never watched the footage again, but I can't bring myself to delete the last copy either. It sits on an old hard drive, locked away in a drawer I refuse to open. Some nights though, I swear I hear it humming faintly, as if it's waiting for me to press play. Tori 2. AI chatbot messages. I've always been a writer, though not a particularly good one. Back in 2022, I was juggling a full-time job in customer support while trying to finish a novel I'd been working on for years. Deadlines and stress made it hard to focus. So when I heard about this AI chatbot that could help generate ideas and improve drafts, I thought, why not give it a try? At first, it was amazing. I'd type in prompts, and the AI would spit out paragraphs that were sharper and more creative than anything I could come up with on my own. I started using it regularly, almost every night, as part of my writing routine. One evening, after a long day at work, I sat down at my desk with a cup of tea and booted up the chatbot. The prompt I typed in was simple. Describe a suspenseful scene in a quiet house. The response was chillingly vivid, filled with details about creaking floorboards and shadows that moved when no one was looking. I was impressed, but then, at the end of the text, it added something that made me pause. Check under the sink in your kitchen. That's where it's hiding. My first thought was that I'd somehow mistyped, or maybe it was a glitch. I laughed it off and closed the chat for the night, but the words lingered in my mind as I went to bed. The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I opened the cupboard under my sink. Nothing unusual, just cleaning supplies and a box of garbage bags. Still, it felt odd, like the AI had reached out to me directly, even though I knew that wasn't possible. That night, I logged back into the chatbot, eager to see if it would repeat the strange behavior. I typed another prompt, something unrelated this time. Write a scene about a storm. The response started normally, describing howling winds and flickering lights. But again, at the end, there was an odd message. The upstairs closet. Something is waiting there. This time, my stomach dropped. I sat there staring at the screen, my tea now cold and untouched. I tried to reason with myself. It had to be a coincidence, some sort of pattern in the AI's algorithm that made it spit out random, eerie sentences. But deep down, I felt uneasy. I decided not to check the upstairs closet. It felt ridiculous, like I'd be giving in to some silly prank. Instead, I logged off and spent the rest of the evening binging a show to distract myself. But even as I tried to focus, I kept glancing toward the stairs, half expecting to hear something creak. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Every little sound in my apartment felt amplified, the hum of the fridge, the faint ticking of a wall clock. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Around 2 a.m., I finally drifted off, but I woke up suddenly, a couple of hours later. My bedroom light, which I always turned off, was flickering. My heart started pounding as I sat up in bed. Power surge, I whispered to myself, trying to stay calm. But as I reached for my phone to check the time, I saw a new notification. An email from the chatbot. The subject line read, "It's closer than you think." I didn't open the email. Instead, I shut my phone off entirely and lay there in the flickering light, trying to convince myself that this wasn't happening. I decided to stop using the chatbot altogether. Maybe I'd been spending too much time online, and my brain was playing tricks on me. The next morning, when I turned my phone back on, the email was gone. There was no trace of it in my inbox, trash, or spam folder. That should have been a relief, but it only made me more paranoid. Was it possible I'd imagined it? Or worse, had something deleted it? Against my better judgment, I opened the chatbot that night. I wanted answers. I typed a single question. "What do you want?" The response came instantly, as if it had been waiting for me. "To help you," it said. For a moment, I almost laughed at the absurdity. But then, another line appeared. "There's something in the basement. You need to see it before it's too late." I stared at the words, my hands trembling on the keyboard. My apartment didn't even have a basement. This had to be a mistake. Right. Or was it talking about the building's communal storage area downstairs? I tried to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight and headed down to the basement, the AI's words repeating in my mind. The storage area was eerily quiet, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Most of the storage units were locked, including mine, but something felt off. I couldn't pinpoint it at first, but then I noticed a faint scratching sound coming from the far corner. I froze, my heart racing. The sound was so faint, it could have been my imagination, but as I stood there, it grew louder. It was coming from a vent. I stepped closer, the beam of my flashlight trembling as I held it out in front of me. The vent cover was dusty, and the screws were rusted, but I could see something inside. It looked like a piece of paper, folded neatly and wedged between the slats. My hands were shaking as I pried the cover loose. I unfolded the paper, and my stomach dropped. It was a note, written in a shaky, almost childlike scrawl. "It's watching you." The scratching stopped the moment I read the words. I bolted upstairs, slamming the door to my apartment behind me and locking it. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath. I didn't even turn off the flashlight. I just sat there, gripping it like a weapon. I didn't sleep that night. Every shadow, every sound, felt like a threat. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I deleted the chatbot app and wiped my laptop clean, thinking it would be enough. But the messages didn't stop. They started appearing in other places on my phone, on sticky notes I didn't remember writing. One day, I found "turnaround" scrawled on my bathroom mirror in the fog after a shower. I felt like I was losing my mind, but every time I tried to ignore it, the warnings became more specific. The closet. It's waiting there. The same closet the chatbot had mentioned before. I couldn't avoid it any longer. That night, I stood in front of the closet, flashlight in hand, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The door was slightly ajar, just enough to let the darkness inside spill out like a void. I told myself it was nothing, that I was letting my imagination run wild. But as I reached for the doorknob, I heard it. A faint, wet breathing sound coming from inside. I froze, my fingers hovering over the wood. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. Something about the sound. It was like it was calling to me, daring me to look. Slowly, I swung the door open. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating rows of clothes hanging neatly on their rack. For a moment, I felt stupid. Of course, there was nothing there. But then I heard it again, breathing, now louder and more distinct. It wasn't coming from the closet itself. It was coming from above. My hands trembled as I angled the flashlight upward, toward the shelf that ran across the top. That's when I saw it. A pair of eyes reflecting the light, wide and unblinking, staring back at me. I stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. The beam spun wildly as it hit the floor, casting shadows that twisted and danced across the room. The breathing grew louder, more ragged, as if it was moving closer. I scrambled to my feet and slammed the closet door shut, wedging a chair under the handle for good measure. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely grip my phone as I called the police. I didn't even know what to tell them. "There's something in my closet," I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. The officers arrived quickly, but by the time they searched the closet, there was nothing there. No sign of forced entry, no hidden crawl space, nothing to explain what I'd seen. They must have thought I was crazy, though they were polite enough not to say it outright. After they left, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the closed closet door. I thought about leaving, maybe booking a hotel for the night, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't help. Whatever this was, it wasn't tied to the apartment. It was tied to me. The messages kept coming, even after I smashed my laptop and changed my phone. They weren't just warnings anymore, they were threats. "You can't hide from it," one text read. Another said, "It knows you saw it." I tried to ignore them, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw those unblinking eyes staring back at me from the darkness. Sleep became impossible. I started keeping every light in the apartment on, as if that would keep it at bay. But the lights would flicker now and then, plunging the room into brief moments of darkness that felt like an eternity. One night, the flickering stopped altogether. My apartment went completely dark. The silence so heavy it felt like the walls were pressing in on me. Then, the screen of my phone lit up. A single message appeared. "Turn around." My body froze. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Every muscle in my body screamed at me not to look, but some unseen force compelled me. Slowly, I turned. The faint glow of the phone illuminated just enough to reveal a figure standing inches away from me. It had no face, no features, just a dark, shifting void where its head should have been. The last thing I remember is its hand reaching for me, impossibly long fingers curling around my throat. Then, static. Pure, deafening static. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor of my apartment, the lights back on, everything as it should have been except my phone was gone. The closet door was wide open, its emptiness taunting me. I moved out the next day and never looked back. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the faint hum of static, like a reminder that it's still out there, waiting. Story 3. CCTV and the faceless figure back in 2020. I was working the graveyard shift for the city's traffic monitoring department. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it paid the bills. My nights were usually quiet, spent in a dimly lit control room surrounded by a wall of monitors showing live feeds from CCTV cameras across the city. Most of the time, it was mundane stuff: cars running red lights, the occasional pedestrian crossing where they shouldn't. I liked the solitude, and I'd gotten used to the monotony. That was, until the night I saw it. It started around 2 a.m., during one of my routine scans of the cameras. I noticed something strange on a feed from a park near the edge of town. There was a figure standing near the entrance, just barely within the frame. At first I thought it was a glitch. The figure was tall, unnaturally so, and slightly out of focus. No matter how much I zoomed in, I couldn't make out any details. It wasn't facing the camera, but something about it felt wrong. I flagged the feed, planning to report it to my supervisor later, and moved on to the next camera. But the figure didn't stay in the park. 15 minutes later, I spotted it again, this time on a camera, in a residential neighborhood miles away. It was standing in the same position, slightly hunched, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. There were no cars, no pedestrians, just the figure, perfectly still. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, or a coincidence, but a knot of unease was already forming in my stomach. When I switched to another feed, I saw it again, now in a completely different part of the city. That's when I knew something was off. I couldn't stop watching. No matter which camera feed I switched to, the figure seemed to appear somewhere new. It was never walking or moving. It would just be there, always standing in the same unnervingly still position. By 3 a.m., I was glued to the monitors, my pulse racing. I even started double-checking the timestamps to see if the footage was somehow delayed or looping, but everything was current. And then, for the first time, it moved. On a feed from a deserted parking lot, The figure turned its head slightly toward the camera. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it didn't have a face. Just smooth, pale nothingness where its features should have been. I jolted back in my chair, my hands clammy on the console. My instincts told me to call my supervisor, but what would I say? That I'd been watching a faceless figure teleporting across the city. They'd laugh me out of the building. So instead, I stayed quiet, convincing myself that I was just tired, maybe imagining things. But then the phone rang. The sound nearly made me jump out of my skin. Calls during the graveyard shift were rare, and when I picked up, the voice on the other end sent a chill down my spine. It was a whisper. Distorted and crackling with static. "Do you see it?" I slammed the phone down, my heart pounding. I didn't want to look at the screens anymore, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. On one of the cameras, I saw the figure again, now closer than ever, standing at the edge of a bridge, just barely out of focus. Then something even stranger happened. The screen flickered, and for a brief second, the figure wasn't alone. There was someone else, a man, standing next to it. He looked normal, jeans, a hoodie, but his expression was blank, almost trance-like. Then, just as quickly as he appeared, he was gone. Only the figure remained. Reports of missing persons started flooding the local news the following day. The first was a jogger who had disappeared from the park. Then a woman vanished near the bridge where I'd seen the figure. Each location matched where the figure had appeared on the cameras. I told myself it was a coincidence, but deep down, I knew better. That night, when I returned to work, I hesitated before turning on the monitors. Part of me hoped it would be gone. But as soon as the feeds came to life, there it was, standing in the middle of a busy intersection, completely unnoticed by the cars passing by. I leaned forward, my face inches from the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then, as if it could sense me watching, the figure turned. It didn't have eyes, but I felt its attention lock onto me. The screen flickered again, and this time, words appeared in blocky, distorted text at the bottom of the feed. "You're next." I shoved my chair back so hard it toppled over, the clatter echoing in the empty control room. My breathing was shallow, my hands shaking. I knew I had to report it, but when I tried to pull up the footage, it was gone. The timestamp still showed the correct time, but the feed was blank. Desperate, I called my supervisor, stammering out a vague explanation about a malfunctioning camera. He sounded annoyed, but promised to take a look in the morning. I sat there, paralyzed, dreading what I might see next. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something. On one of the feeds, a live shot of the parking lot outside the control room, the figure was there. This time, it wasn't standing still. It was walking, and it was walking toward the building. I bolted for the door, my heart racing, but when I stepped into the hallway, the fluorescent lights began to flicker. The faint hum of the cameras seemed to follow me, growing louder with each step. I didn't look back, I couldn't. By the time I reached the exit, my hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get the keycard to work. When I finally stumbled out into the cool night air, I turned to look back at the building. Every light in the control room had gone dark, except for one monitor. Even from a distance, I could see the figure on the screen. I didn't go back to work the next night. I told my supervisor I was sick, which wasn't a lie. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw that faceless figure standing in the parking lot. But staying home didn't make me feel any safer. I kept thinking about the figure appearing on the monitor outside the control room. It felt like a warning, or maybe a promise. I considered going to the police, but how could I explain any of this without sounding insane? I tried to convince myself that maybe it was all just a stress-induced hallucination, but deep down, I knew better. That night, as I lay on the couch with the TV on for background noise, my phone buzzed. It was an email from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "It's here." My stomach dropped as I opened it. The email contained a single image-on out-of-focus screenshot of my apartment building's lobby. And there it was, the figure, standing by the elevators. My hands started shaking so badly, I nearly dropped my phone. I wanted to run, to pack my things and leave, but where would I go? If it had followed me this far, it would find me again. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and locked myself in the bathroom, the only place in the apartment without windows. I sat on the cold tile floor, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. Hours passed, and the only sound was the faint hum of the plumbing. Just as I started to think maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, my phone buzzed again. Another email. This time it contained a video. With trembling fingers, I pressed play. The footage was from a CCTV feed, showing the hallway outside my apartment. The camera was fixed on my door, and as I watched, the figure stepped into frame. It didn't move like a person. Its motions were jerky, almost mechanical, as it slowly turned toward the door. My door. The screen flickered, and for a moment, the feed went black. When it came back, the figure was gone. But the camera now showed a new angel inside my apartment, looking directly at the bathroom door where I was hiding. I dropped the phone, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. My mind raced. How was this possible? My apartment didn't have cameras. I stared at the screen as the video continued. The door on the feed, the door I was staring at, began to creak open. I don't remember much after that. When I woke up, it was morning. I was lying on my bathroom floor. The door was still closed, the knife clutched tightly in my hand. My phone was gone, and so was any trace of the emails or footage. I checked every corner of my apartment, every window and closet, but everything was exactly as it should have been. Except for one thing. On my desk, where I used to sit for my shifts, was a single piece of paper. Written in blocky, uneven letters were the words, "You can't hide forever." I quit my job that same day and moved out of the city within a week. For a while, I stayed with my sister, far from any urban centers or CCTV cameras. I thought maybe distance would keep me safe, that whatever this was couldn't follow me. But even now, in this small town, I can't escape the feeling that I'm being watched. Sometimes, when I walk past the town square or glance at a security monitor in a grocery store, I catch a glimpse of something tall, blurry, and faceless, standing just out of focus. I don't stop to look anymore. I just keep walking and hope it doesn't follow.